So, without much further ado, I would like to announce our keynote speaker for today. I already said it's Professor Ulrich Kelber. He's the German Federal Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information, and he will open our second day of the Privacy Conference with his keynote, A Question of Values, the Cooperation in European Data Protection. A well-known politician and former parliamentary state secretary to the Federal Minister for Justice and Consumer Protection, Professor Kelber became Federal Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information in 2019. Dear Professor Kelber, we are very glad that you are here with us today. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. 2 years of the GDPR and the European supervisory practice. I appreciate the enthusiasm with which Bitkom time and again supports its stance. However, I'm just as determined and keen to express my opinion when it comes to defending the GDPR. It's a major European project with a worldwide impact. With less than 2.5 years of age, the still young European data protection law is in the area of tension between multifarious challenges. I would like to explain this through the example of 4 points. The revolution of technological developments, the rise of China with all the technological, economic, and political consequences, the continued growth during the corona crisis of the power of US technology companies, and the COVID-19 crisis with its still unforeseeable challenges and long-term effects. Every 10 years, the performance of storage devices increases by a factor of 25. This illustrates the full scope of the changes. This technological development remains unstoppable. That means entire professions and industries and business models will radically change or completely disappear through digitalization. And society must prepare for these upcoming changes. This also means reducing fears, mitigating the social consequences of digitalization, and opening up opportunities for everyone by shaping this change and setting the framework conditions, also in terms of legal aspects which expresses the values of our society. And one thing is clear, the willingness to take part in this change, to open up to digitalization, depends on trust. Trust in your products and services, trust in the enforcement of rules of the game, also in the digitalized world. As a technology company, you therefore have an important responsibility in a democracy and for democracy in times of further accelerating digitalization. Second point, China and the digital revolution of unfreedom. Unfortunately, other players go about their work without democracy. In China, there's an increasingly authoritarian party with state governments and at the same time a highly competent private sector. That is exactly the difference to the collapsed Soviet command economy. And this difference is also decisive for the economic success. Artificial intelligence is not only regarded there as a miracle weapon for economic expansion, but also for the more effective design and safeguarding of the authoritarian rule. The project of a digital Silk Route with a Chinese-dominated blockchain ecosystem and a Chinese-controlled digital currency also pays in this bank account. This is the definition of dual use made in China. China has achieved a lead in the application of AI technologies over European suppliers. Chinese companies can use the enormous amounts of data, which were accrued without impediment as a turbo fuel, among other things, for the further development of AI. In this total surveillance project, China, as a surveillance state, has a kind of a locational advantage. Such economic growth at the expense of fundamental rights cannot and must be not a model for Europe. So what to do on the European side? So the idea of liberty, which is the basis of the GDPR, can only be fruitful if the rules prove their worth and if they are accepted by the parties involved. And for European research policy, this means promoting data protection-friendly alternatives in the field of AI and other digital innovations. The made in Europe is then the counter model to the Chinese way. In this context, I would like to hear more voices from the German economy for these alternatives. The growing power of US corporations, Apple, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and others were the most expensive companies in the world even before the Corona crisis. They have financial resources and data masses with which they can exercise influence and even oust more technology and innovative competitors. In order to set limits in this regard, cooperation between the protection of competition and data protection will also become increasingly important in Europe. Amazon increasingly supplants local retail, and also digital boost through ordering systems and video conferences mainly benefits the US market leaders. It is precisely for this reason that Europe must finally emancipate itself technologically in response to the current crisis. The market exists. The demand for data protection friendly IT is stronger than ever before. The European market has an opportunity to use its own offers to set a benchmark and thus also to put pressure on its competitors. Unfortunately, the local offers are still rare because in this connection, some companies are still preoccupied with complaining about the requirements. In order to act successfully in this regards, many approaches of the European policy must apply simultaneously, from economic and research policy to antitrust law. And we need a level playing field, but not reducing our values, but by enforcing the rules of the GDPR. This should be a claim even for the German economy. And this would be the contribution of data protection in order to put an end to this development, which is negative for Europe. What has to be done? In the first place, the European supervisory authorities must make better use of the procedure of cooperation within the European Data Protection Board, as laid down in the GDPR. There's still much room for improvement. Data protection violations must be punished promptly and as effectively as possible by the competent lead authority, including the imposition of fines. This is the only way to oblige global technology groups to comply with the European rules of the game and to create space for European competitors. 2.5 years after focusing the GDPR, there are still no decisions against against major US data processors, in any of the important proceedings. I cannot accept that such a decision is even not pending. And I also ask the European Commission to check whether European law is being undermined by national regulations in certain member states. The Corona crisis and data protection. The pandemic has made the challenges for data protection even bigger, even more urgent. Corona has become a process accelerator in many areas, including digitalization and data protection. Complaints from the economy about too much bureaucracy as an obstacle to the post-crisis economy are not new. The sound of this long-playing record accompanies the GDPR since its development. This record is usually devoid of empirically verifiable effects. Various stakeholders are currently fishing out their old demands: less data protection, reduction of climate protection, new tax. These are not future-oriented and sustainable, no more than the long-playing record itself. But the regard to criticism on certain points of the GDPR, which is quite understandable in individual cases, don't aim for a rollback. Rather score with data protection-friendly solutions. This will prove to be more advantageous for your balance sheets than anything else. I guarantee on the long run, products which do not meet the requirements of data protection will be shelf warmers. As a positive example, here in Germany, let's make a few comments on the so-called Corona warning app. I know the debates in the newspapers, but in case a data protection friendly product was developed by involving the Data Protection Supervisory Authority as counselors. It has become a national and international success. Almost 90 million users downloaded this app, more than in all other European countries combined. And the reason for this success is the trust in the product and in its reliable data protection. A lesson learned from this with regard to research and to the tracking of contacts, transparent solutions which exclude individual tracking and repersonalizations are successful. But even this Corona Warn app shows that there is a technical dependence on the smartphone systems of Apple and Google, so a lack of European sovereignty. These companies assure that they process the data exclusively for specific purposes and in compliance with data protection law. We have to look on that closely as authorities, but the GDPR would give us the possibilities to fine if there would be an infringement. So in the example of Apple, which global annual turnover was more than 260 billion US dollars last year, the potential fine would be over 10 billion US dollars. It is to the GDPR that we owe these possibilities to impose severe sanctions. This also allows lawful processing of sensitive health data. It means that the data protection is not opposed to research in particular, nor to pandemic control in general, if one engages in basic principles, such as data minimization and the right to object, instead of complaining about values cased in law. We have the report of the European Commission about the first evaluation of the GDPR. This makes a positive assessment, and I'm glad that the Commission also mentions the weak points of the GDPR. The harmonization in the member states is increasing, but there is still a certain fragmentation of law and practice, and we have to monitor this. As German's representative in the European Data Protection Board, I can simply confirm this finding of the Commission. It is absolutely clear to the Commission and to the supervisory authorities that the GDPR is definitely a challenge in certain areas. Especially smaller, but also medium-sized companies experience the GDPR partly as a difficult operation. However, it would be not expedient to have different data protection regulations which are graduated according simply to company size. Due to the risk-based approach, the size of companies alone cannot serve as a basis for any exemptions from the GDPR. This does not make it easier for startups, craftsmen, small business owners, and clubs. I therefore strongly support the Commission's request to the supervisory authorities to continue offering assistance to this group of companies. Some look on the national data protection supervision. For some time now, a request from the Ministry of Economic Affairs of Lower Saxony has been on the table. The request calls for the data protection supervision for the entire non-public sector to be transferred to the federal level. The complaint focuses above all on the lacking consistency and lacking binding nature of the German supervisory authorities' decisions. There are comparable suggestions from the Data Ethics Commissions and the Competition Law 4.0 Commission. As a member of the Data Ethics Commission, however, I would like to say that it was primarily about strengthening and formalizing the coordination between the authorities. Lower Saxony is right to criticize the lacking binding nature of the decisions of the Conference of the Independent German Federal and State Data Protection Supervisory Authorities, in short DSK. However, the DSK is not an official body. It has no legal basis. This would require a federal statutory regulation or a treaty between the federal and Länder governments. However, without much effort, it would be possible to create at least a secretariat of the DSK. This would allow optimal preparation even if small data protection authorities chair the conference or working groups. The 18 data protection authorities should adhere consistently to the decisions, guidelines, and guidances of the DSK in our all-day practice, even though we were once outvoted. And within the DSK, we need to get faster in finding common positions to have a ground and a guideline for the companies. Within the Data Protection Conference, we have responded to this challenge with a working group Data Protection Conference 2.0, so just 2.0, not 4.0. Improving the European data protection supervision. with the European Data Protection Board. The data protection supervision in the European Union has a committee in which we could take binding decisions that are valid through the European Union. However, in many rather urgent cases, we have not been able to do so because, above all, the Irish and Luxembourg lead supervisory authorities have not yet submitted a proposal for a decision. This concerns almost all complaints about Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. This makes the EDPB a lame duck. The Schrems II judgment and none of your business 101 complaints are now both a risk and an opportunity for the European Data Protection Board. These complaints which have been submitted are not against Google and Facebook directly, but against companies that use Google Analytics and Facebook Connect integrations. In Germany, the complaints concern 8 companies. As a result, the supervisory authorities of each member state can or must handle the complaints independently without being reliant on a decision of principle from Ireland. As these complaints are based on a single problem, there must be a European vote of principle. The results of the examination in Spain should ultimately not differ from those in Germany or Sweden. In these cases, the EDPB succeeds in confirming the function of the GDPR as a milestone, or if it fails, it will be the beginning of the end of the EDPB in its form of today. There are still some gaps in the evaluation report of the Commission. I agree with the positive assessments, but I would like to hear something about scoring and profiling, and not wait for that until May 2024. Self-learning algorithms open up new possibilities to predict and even control human behavior. It has long since gone beyond credit decisions and advertising. We need a European tightening of the current legal framework in order to effectively protect people from manipulation and discriminations by scoring and profiling. The existing regulations of the GDPR should already extend to profiling, not only be to automated decision-making, which is circumvented in practice. I also strongly support the approach of the Data Ethics Commission about the risk potential regulation of algorithms, which gives a free room for 99.99% of all algorithms, but divide the others in a risk class approach. This would be a base for European legislators to face with the task of setting effective limits to the use of personal data for profile. I see that there is some problems with time, so maybe a final remark, Ms. Demo. The GDPR will remain, if it's attacked at its core, an opportunity for common strategies for a competitive European IT economy will be vasted. Instead, a dialogue should take place which respects decisions based on our values. The GDPR is the expression of European values in law, and we should take that as a base for our competition in the digitalization in a global world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kelber, for this enlightening keynote. Definitely, dialogue is the key word that I take away from your speech, and I think that's where we definitely meet. And I think we shouldn't talk about the values. I think we totally agree about the values that underlie the GDPR. It's rather sometimes it's the practical application and maybe also certain interpretations of some of the rules that might be open for discussion, whether they are actually necessary in order to protect the values that underlie the GDPR. But I think we also totally agree on the need of harmonization and the need for more cooperation between the European DPAs and the further development of the processes that we have there in order to develop a truly European interpretation of our common rules. So thank you very much for being with us this morning. I hope you can still hop into some of the other sessions if your schedule allows for that. And we will now go on, and the next panel is introduced to you by Jörn Wittmann. He is the CEO of the Self and Co-Regulation for an Optimized Policy Environment in Europe, and he and his organization come in when it is about concretization of the legal framework in order to make it a usable tool for companies. I think we'll have a very short break, and then he'll introduce his panelists to you, and they will give you a view on how codes of conduct might be a help in finding ways for compliant data transfers in third countries.